There was a time when humanity could not imagine a world without kings. Entire civilizations were built around the idea that one person, chosen by blood or by force, held the authority to decide the fate of millions. That idea evolved over time. Kings became elected leaders, empires became nations, and the presidency emerged as one of the most powerful roles in modern society. But what if this is just another phase in a much longer story? What if the presidency, as we know it today, is not the peak of governance, but simply a transitional structure? A bridge between a past defined by centralized authority and a future defined by collective intelligence? Because something fundamental is changing, not just in politics, but in the way humans think, connect, and make decisions. And that change is quietly reshaping the very foundation of power. To understand why the presidency might become irrelevant, we first need to understand why it was so important in the first place. In earlier societies, information moved slowly. Knowledge was limited. Communication across large populations was almost impossible in real time. In such an environment, centralized decision-making was not just practical, it was essential. Someone had to coordinate armies, manage resources, resolve conflicts, and make strategic decisions with incomplete information. That someone eventually became kings. Even in modern democracies, the presidency exists because complexity requires coordination. A country needs direction, especially when millions of people with different interests must function as one system. The president became the focal point of that coordination, the symbolic and operational center of decision-making. But here lies the paradox. The more complex our world becomes, the less capable any single individual becomes of understanding it fully. Today, the systems a president must manage are no longer linear or even predictable. They are dynamic, interconnected, and constantly evolving. Climate systems, global trade networks, digital economies, artificial intelligence, public health, geopolitical tensions, each of these domains alone exceeds the cognitive capacity of any one person. And yet, we still expect a single office to oversee all of them. The structure has remained the same, but the world it was designed for no longer exists. While political systems have been slow to evolve, another transformation has been accelerating beneath the surface: the rise of collective intelligence. Collective intelligence is not a new concept. It exists everywhere in nature. Ant colonies coordinate complex logistics without a central leader. Birds move in synchronized flocks, adapting instantly to threats. Even the human brain itself is not controlled by a single neuron, but emerges from billions of interconnected ones working together. What is new is that humanity now has the technological infrastructure to operate in the same way. For the first time in history, billions of people are connected in real time. Information flows instantly across the globe. Knowledge is no longer centralized in institutions or governments. It is distributed across networks. Platforms like open-source communities, collaborative research environments, and even decentralized financial systems demonstrate something profound. Highly complex systems can function, adapt, and even outperform centralized models without a single decision-maker. Consider Wikipedia, one of the largest repositories of knowledge ever created. It has no president, no central authority dictating every piece of content. And yet, through collective contribution and continuous feedback, it maintains a level of accuracy and scale that would have been impossible under a traditional hierarchical model. Or consider open-source software, which powers much of the world's digital infrastructure. It is built, maintained, and improved by distributed communities across the globe. Decisions are made collectively, iteratively, and transparently. No single individual controls the system, yet the system works, often better than centralized alternatives. These are not exceptions. They are early signals of a much larger shift. If collective intelligence is the philosophy, technology is the enabler. Artificial intelligence, real-time data systems, digital twins, and global connectivity are fundamentally changing how decisions can be made. In the past, decisions relied heavily on human intuition, limited datasets, and delayed feedback loops. Today, decisions can be informed by real-time data streams, predictive models, and simulations that explore thousands of scenarios before a policy is ever implemented. Imagine a city where traffic systems adjust dynamically based on real-time congestion patterns, where energy distribution optimizes itself according to demand and environmental conditions, where public services evolve continuously based on citizen feedback and behavioral data. In such a system, decision-making is no longer an event. It becomes a continuous process. This is already happening in fragments across the world. Smart cities are beginning to integrate data-driven systems that operate semi-autonomously. Financial markets respond instantly to global events without waiting for centralized approval. Supply chains self-adjust based on demand signals and disruptions. In this context, the role of a president begins to change. The question is no longer who should make decisions, but rather how decisions should emerge from the system itself. Because when a system becomes intelligent enough, centralized control becomes not just unnecessary, but inefficient. Centralized leadership carries inherent risks, especially in a world of increasing complexity. When decisions are concentrated in the hands of a few individuals, the system becomes vulnerable to human limitations, biases, blind spots, political pressures, and even simple errors in judgment. History offers countless examples where decisions made by a small group or even a single leader had massive unintended consequences for millions of people. These are not just failures of individuals, they are failures of the structure itself. A centralized system assumes that those at the top have access to the best information and the ability to process it effectively. But in a world where information is vast, dynamic, and distributed, this assumption no longer holds true. In contrast, distributed systems allow for continuous input, feedback, and correction. They are not immune to errors, but they are far more resilient. They evolve. They adapt, they learn. This is why, in many domains, decentralized systems are already outperforming centralized ones, not because they are perfect, but because they are adaptive. As collective intelligence and technology continue to evolve, governance itself is likely to transform. Instead of decisions being imposed from the top down, they will increasingly emerge from the interaction of data, systems, and communities. Policies may no longer be static documents but dynamic frameworks that evolve in response to real-world conditions. Citizens may not participate only during elections but continuously, contributing data, feedback, and preferences that shape outcomes in real time. Leadership will not disappear, but it will be redefined. It will shift from authority to coordination, from control to facilitation. In such a system, influence will not come from holding an office for a fixed term, but from contributing value, insight, and trust within the network. Reputation may become more important than position, expertise more important than power. And gradually, the idea of a single individual representing the will of millions may begin to feel outdated. The presidency will not vanish overnight. Institutions rarely disappear suddenly. They evolve. Over time, the role may become more symbolic than operational. A president might serve as a communicator, a unifier, or a representative figure on the global stage, while the actual decision-making power shifts into systems that are more distributed, data-driven, and collectively shaped. In some ways, this would mirror the transformation of monarchies in many parts of the world today, once absolute centers of power, now largely ceremonial roles within more complex governance systems. But the deeper shift is not about replacing one role with another. It is about redefining how power itself is structured. What we are witnessing is not just political evolution. It is a transformation in how human societies organize intelligence. We are moving from hierarchical systems to networked systems, from centralized authority to distributed cognition, from decision-making as a privilege of the few to decision-making as a property of the collective. This does not mean the future will be simple or free of conflict. On the contrary, it will require new frameworks, new ethics, and new ways of balancing human values with technological capabilities. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The systems we built for the past are no longer sufficient for the future. One day, future generations may look back at our era with curiosity. They may wonder how billions of people once trusted a single individual or a small group to make decisions on their behalf. And they may see the presidency not as the pinnacle of governance, but as a stepping stone, a necessary phase in the evolution of collective intelligence. Because the future may not belong to leaders in the traditional sense. It may belong to systems, to networks, and to all of us, thinking together. If this idea made you think differently about leadership in the future, subscribe. And tell me in the comments, would you trust a collective system more than a president? Now, before we go further into what this means for the future of presidencies, let's pause and look at a real-world system that has already gone through this exact transformation. Instead of theorizing, we can examine how power actually shifted in one of the most established governance models in history, the monarchy. Because what we are predicting for presidents tomorrow has, in many ways, already happened to kings. So let's take a closer look at the kingship system and see how absolute power gradually turned into symbolism and, in some cases, into a questioned burden. There was a time when kings were not just important, they were everything. Entire nations revolved around them. Wars were fought in their name, economies rose and fell at their command, and millions of people lived their lives shaped by decisions made by a single individual. The idea that one day these figures would become largely symbolic, appearing at ceremonies, waving to crowds and cutting ribbons, would have seemed absurd. And yet today, that is exactly what we see in countries like the United Kingdom. The monarchy still exists, but its power has fundamentally transformed. The king does not govern in the way monarchs once did. Instead, real authority lies within institutions, systems, and elected bodies. The monarch remains as a symbol of continuity, identity, and tradition, but not as the central decision-maker. This transformation was not sudden. It was gradual, almost invisible while it was happening. And now, a similar shift may be beginning again, this time not for kings, but for presidents. The story of monarchy is, in many ways, a story of decentralization. In France, the concentration of power in the monarchy eventually led to revolution. In Russia, the fall of the Tsar marked the collapse of a system that could no longer adapt to the complexity and pressures of modern society. But in other countries, such as the United Kingdom, the transformation was more subtle. Power slowly shifted from the monarch to parliament, to institutions, and to systems of governance that could process more information and represent more perspectives. This evolution did not eliminate the monarchy, it redefined it. The monarch became a symbol rather than a strategist, a unifier rather than a decision-maker. Similar transformations occurred in Japan, where the emperor transitioned from a divine ruler to a symbolic figure after World War II, and in Sweden and Norway, where monarchs retain cultural importance but minimal political power. The key insight is this: when societies become more complex, centralized authority becomes less effective. Power does not disappear, it redistributes. However, once power becomes symbolic, a new question emerges. Is the symbol still worth maintaining? In the United Kingdom, the royal family continues to be supported through public funding, including security, infrastructure, and ceremonial functions. While many see this as part of national identity and heritage, others question whether the cost aligns with its practical value in modern governance. The debate intensifies during times of economic pressure, when public resources are scrutinized more closely. In Spain, the monarchy has faced similar criticism, particularly during periods of economic crisis, where public perception shifted from reverence to skepticism. In Thailand, discussions around the cost of the monarchy and its role in modern society have become increasingly prominent, especially among younger generations. And in some countries, the conclusion was clear. Nations like Italy, Germany, and Greece chose to abolish their monarchies entirely, deciding that symbolic authority no longer justified its cost or relevance. This pattern reveals something fundamental. Once a role loses its functional importance, its survival depends entirely on perception. And perception can change. Presidents today occupy a position that, structurally, resembles that of kings in the later stages of monarchy. While they are elected and operate within democratic systems, they still represent a centralization of decision-making authority. A single individual, supported by a limited circle, is expected to make or approve decisions that impact millions. But the world presidents operate in today is far more complex than the one that created the role. Global supply chains span continents. Financial systems react in milliseconds. Climate systems operate on planetary scales, and digital networks connect billions of people in real time. No single individual, no matter how capable, can fully comprehend or manage this level of complexity. This is where real-world case studies begin to reveal a shift already in motion. In Estonia, one of the most advanced digital societies in the world, governance has already moved significantly away from centralized control. Citizens can vote, access services, and interact with government systems entirely online. Decisions are increasingly supported by integrated digital platforms that process vast amounts of data. The role of leadership remains, but the system itself carries much of the operational intelligence. In the United Arab Emirates, particularly in cities like Dubai, smart governance initiatives are introducing data-driven decision-making at scale. Digital twins, AI-driven analytics, and real-time monitoring systems are being used to manage infrastructure, urban planning, and public services. These systems do not replace leadership, but they significantly reduce reliance on individual decision-making by embedding intelligence directly into the system. Even in economic systems, decentralization is becoming evident. Blockchain-based organizations, often referred to as DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, operate without a central leader. Decisions are made collectively by stakeholders, often through transparent voting mechanisms encoded into the system itself. While still evolving, these models demonstrate that complex coordination can occur without a single authority figure. As these systems evolve, the role of the president begins to change, not abruptly, but gradually. Presidents are increasingly acting as communicators rather than controllers, as representatives rather than sole decision-makers. Policies are shaped by institutions, advisors, data models, and global constraints. Decisions are often the result of complex processes rather than individual judgment. This mirrors the historical trajectory of monarchies. Kings did not lose power overnight. They retained influence for decades, sometimes centuries, while real authority slowly shifted elsewhere. Eventually, their role became symbolic. The same process may already be underway with presidencies. The turning point comes when systems consistently outperform individuals in decision-making. In finance, algorithmic trading systems already make decisions faster and often more effectively than human traders. In urban management, AI-driven traffic systems optimize flow better than manual planning. In public health, data-driven models can predict outbreaks and recommend interventions with a level of precision that no individual could achieve alone. As these systems become more reliable, the justification for centralized human decision-making weakens. At that point, the presidency begins to resemble late-stage monarchy, not obsolete, but no longer essential. If history is any guide, the presidency will not disappear suddenly. It will evolve. The role may become increasingly symbolic, focused on communication, representation, and national identity, while real decision-making shifts into distributed systems, collective processes, and intelligent infrastructures. And eventually, societies may begin to ask the same question they once asked about kings. Do we still need this role? Some may choose to keep it for cultural or symbolic reasons. Others may decide that it no longer serves a practical purpose. And in those cases, the presidency may fade, not as a failure, but as a natural step in the evolution of governance. History does not repeat itself exactly, but it reveals patterns. Kings once held absolute power, then they became symbolic. Then, in many places, they disappeared. Presidents today stand at a similar crossroads, not because leadership is no longer needed, but because the form of leadership is changing. From individuals to systems, from authority to intelligence, from control to collective emergence. And one day, future generations may look back and wonder how billions of people once believed that one person could decide for all. If this perspective challenged how you think about power and leadership, subscribe and tell me, will presidents become the new kings, or will they disappear entirely?